James Suckling and his team of 12 prolific tasters reviewed an impressive 40,000 wines in 2024. They recently came out with their top 100 wines for 2024, and I've been studying that list. I have 12 observations or takeaways from that list that I'm going to be sharing in today's video. And be sure to stick around until the end, where I'm going to reveal two of my absolute favorite wines from this list. James Suckling can be a polarizing figure. I know many people whose palate aligns closely with his and who swear by his recommendations, but I also know people who think his scores can be too high and who tend to either dismiss his recommendations or at least subtract some points from his scores for that reason. Nevertheless, Mr. Suckling knows a lot about the world of wine, as he's been in the business for more than 40 years, and I've found that even if you discount his recommendations or subtract points from his scores, his broad identification of trends and themes in the wine industry can be extremely valuable. The first takeaway from my review of James Suckling's Top 100 list of wines for 2024 is that Italy was extremely strong. In fact, Italy came in first and is the most represented country on the list, with more than 25% of the list, or 26 wines in all, including the #1 overall wine of the year. Interestingly, Mr. Suckling also mentioned that he's a big fan of the 2020 vintage for Barolo. This was a bit surprising, as I was in Barolo last fall, and everyone I met with spoke much more highly of the 2019 vintage, which they thought was classic, and they weren't as big of a fan of the 2020 vintage because it was a little bit warmer and these had more of a contemporary style. But that's actually the reason that Mr. Suckling enjoys the 2020 Barolo. He thinks that these wines show some vibrant and expressive aromatics and are ready to enjoy much earlier. He also thinks there may be some inconsistencies in the 2019 vintage, and that quality may vary from producer to producer. Not surprisingly, Tuscany was also very strong and is well represented by both Super Tuscans and Chianti Classico. Mr. Suckling also had high praise for Sicilian wines. In fact, there was a strong showing for Sicily, with the #9 overall wine, which is a red wine, and the #42 overall wine, which is a white wine. Just one quick administrative note, I have a link to the entire list from James Suckling in the description below. So in some instances, I will just refer to a particular ranking number as it reinforces or supports my broad theme that I'm discussing, whereas in other cases, I'll identify wines specifically and perhaps discuss them in more detail. The next takeaway relates to the global reduction in overall wine consumption, which is certainly something we've been hearing a lot about this year. In fact, hardly a week goes by when I don't see some sort of article about how volumes in wine sales are declining, and also about how wine sales are particularly low among younger people. Interestingly, Mr. Suckling states in his report that he believes that high wine prices are at least partially to blame for the reduction in global wine consumption. With respect to young people, Mr. Suckling believes that they have higher costs of living, and so they've been shifting their resources to pay for essentials rather than spending money or splurging on something like wine. This was a bit new to me, as most of the articles that I've been reading have been blaming health concerns or other factors for the reduction in wine, and it also seems like bourbon and whiskey and other items certainly have very high prices and are still doing well with younger people. I'll also note that the quality of wine has never been higher, and that there's many enjoyable wines even at lower price points. So even if people couldn't afford higher priced wines, I would think that if they're a fan of wine generally, they would just switch down a little bit and buy some less expensive but still high quality wines. But I'm certainly very interested to get your opinion on this issue. Is the high price of wine something that's reducing overall wine consumption? Please let me know in the comments below. The next takeaway relates to French wines. France came in second with 18 wines out of the top 100. This is still a reasonable showing, but not nearly as strong as last year when France had an impressive 26 wines on the list, including 19 Bordeaux alone. This year, Bordeaux didn't fare nearly as well due to the challenging 2021 vintage, which I'll discuss in more detail below. But certainly a bright spot for the 2021 vintage was both Bordeaux Blanc and Sauternes. In fact, Mr. Suckling believes that Sauternes could be just as strong in 2021, if not even a little better, than the legendary 2001 vintage. In fact, on his top 100 list, there's 3 different Sauternes wines included, all of which received impressive 100-point scores. 2021 is a huge opportunity both for Sauternes lovers and for wine collectors, so I'm going to briefly go through each of these 3 100-point Sauternes. The first of which came in at number 10. This is the impressive Soudrireau, which I recently featured on this channel. This wine sells for around $80 a bottle, and you'll probably be able to get it for much less than that if you're looking for half bottles. Next up is the impressive and very underrated Laphroaig-Perrier, which came in at number 16 on the overall list, and which is definitely the best value of this trio. In fact, I found this one selling for only around $45 per bottle. Lastly, there's the 100-point Chateau d'Yquem, which came in at only number 34 on this list, and which sells for more than $300 per bottle. While certainly all the wines that I feature on these videos are appropriate for personal consumption, I know that some people who watch my videos also buy wines for investment purposes. So with respect to these 3 Sauternes, these are definitely investment quality wines, but if I was an investor, I would probably focus more on the Chateau d'Yquem. And if you're someone who enjoys the wines for personal consumption, I would definitely focus more on the Soudrireau and particularly the Laphroaig-Perrier, which offers just phenomenal value at the current price point. The next takeaway is that Germany fared extremely well in Mr. Suckling's top 100 for 2024. Germany had 12 wines in the top 100, and this was largely based on the strength of the 2023 vintage in Germany. In fact, there's 2 impressive dry Rieslings in the top 5 of Mr. Suckling's list, one of which is from Künstler and came in at number 2, and the other of which is a Dönhoff from Nahe, and Dönhoff is certainly a producer that I recommend frequently on this channel, so I'm particularly enthusiastic about that wine. While not in the top 10, there's also 2 more extremely impressive Großgewachs Rieslings from world-class producers that made the top 100 list, and which are certainly worthy of further consideration if you're a fan of Riesling. Namely, the Großgewachs Riesling from Rebholz, which came in at number 30 on the list. In addition, the number 55 wine is from world-class producer Dr. Birkeland Wolf, and this is a Großgewachs from Pfalz, and this wine is also certainly one of my favorites on this list. Those who are concerned with the high price of wine will definitely want to consider closely the German wines that are on Mr. Suckling's list, as they're generally quite affordable relative to the other wines on the list, and definitely offer some of the best quality to price ratios of any in the top 100. Just one more quick administrative point for those of you who are looking for pricing information. To the extent I don't mention it, it's very easy to find if you just go to Mr. Suckling's list that's linked in the description below and click on the wine. There's an option that will allow you to check the price for that wine right within the document. The next takeaway is that, like Germany, its neighbor, Austria, also was quite strong, which isn't surprising given its proximity to Germany. In fact, the number 3 overall wine on the list is from Austria. I've long been a big fan of Austrian white wines in particular. As viewers of this channel know, one of my favorite Austrian producers is FX Pichler, and that's a producer I've recommended numerous times on this channel. So I was very glad to see that FX Pichler had the number 3 overall wine in Mr. Suckling's list, namely the FX Pichler Wachau Riesling Ried Kellerberg, which is absolutely a strong buy in my opinion. My next takeaway from reviewing James Suckling's top 100 list for 2024 is that Bordeaux Rouge was a big loser. While Bordeaux generally did okay in terms of the Sauternes and some Bordeaux Blanc that made the top 100, Bordeaux Rouge, or Red Bordeaux, had only 1 wine in the top 100. This compares very unfavorably to last year, when there was an extremely impressive 19 wines from Bordeaux in the top 100 list. The culprit is the challenging 2021 vintage in Bordeaux. I recently did an in-depth video on the 2021 Bordeaux vintage for red wine, and if you're interested in watching that and learning more, definitely check the links below. But suffice it to say that 2021 is not going to be a very strong vintage for collectible Bordeaux. The one bright spot, according to Mr. Suckling, was the L'Église Clinée from Pomerol, which came in at number 80 on the list. The next takeaway is that James Suckling strongly believes that wines from Alsace, France are extremely underrated. In fact, he included 4 wines from Alsace in his top 100, including the number 15 wine, which is from world-class producer Domaine Zind Humbrecht. I recently did a video on underrated wines, and I included a wine from Domaine Zind Humbrecht in that video as well. So I certainly very much agree with Mr. Suckling on this point. Mr. Suckling said it best when he wrote as follows: "I don't understand why more people aren't drinking Alsace wines. They are unique, reflecting perhaps one of the world's most complex terroirs, and showing true character in both red and white wines." Word. In addition to the Domaine Zind Humbrecht wine that came in at number 15, I'm also a big fan of the number 31 wine, which is from high-quality producer Domaine Weinbeck. Namely, this is the Grand Cru Schlossberg St. Catherine. If you're interested in wine recommendations, wine collecting strategies, and learning more about wine, please do subscribe to my channel. I've been collecting wine for more than 15 years and also have a level 4 diploma from the WSET. So I have both formal certification as well as substantial practical knowledge from the School of Hard Knocks. The next takeaway is that the United States certainly rallied a bit from the lackluster showing in last year's Top 100 Wines of 2023. Last year, there were only 6 wines from the United States in the Top 100, largely because of the fires that pervaded the West Coast, including Napa Valley and Willamette Valley, and other regions in between. This year, however, the 2021 vintage was quite strong in Napa Valley, and the list includes some of Mr. Suckling's favorites, like Catiar, which is the Smith-Aught-Lafitte outpost in Napa Valley, as well as Dominus. In fact, I tasted the Dominus in Napa Valley the exact same day that Mr. Suckling did, and I ran into him on the way out. Another one of my favorite wines year in and year out that Mr. Suckling included in his top 100 this year came in at number 49, and that is the Ridge Montebello. While this wine comes from vines that are planted in the Santa Cruz Mountains area and not Napa Valley, it's nevertheless one of my favorite wines in all of the United States, and definitely one that I highly recommend. The best way to get this wine is to get on the Ridge Montebello list, where you can buy futures and pay a substantial discount to the price on release. The next takeaway from my review of James Suckling's Top 100 Wines of 2024 is that this is very much a list for high rollers. While James Suckling did exclude wines that had a median price on WineSearcher of more than $500 per bottle, many of the wines are nevertheless extremely pricey. But James Suckling did do a pretty good job of including at least 9 wines that are priced between $30 and $60 per bottle. In many instances, those less expensive wines will have ratings of 97 or 98 points, rather than the 99 or 100 points that are typically awarded to the more expensive wines. Fans of up-and-coming new wine regions will be interested in the next takeaway, namely that China actually had a wine that made the list. This is the 2020 Ao Yun from Shangri-La, which comes in at number 84 on Mr. Suckling's Top 100 list. I've only had one Chinese wine in the past, and ironically, it was the 2014 vintage of Ao Yun. That was only the second vintage ever that they produced. Certainly, it's my understanding that there's been some incredible progress that's been made in the last 8 or 9 years in the production of Chinese wine and with respect to Ao Yun. But at that time, I tried the Ao Yun probably in 2016 or so, and it was presented to me blind. And I was certainly not impressed with the wine, and I was racking my brains to try to figure out what it could be. It was definitely a Bordeaux blend that consisted of mostly Cabernet Sauvignon, but it was just extraordinarily earthy, and it had lots of green or pyrazine notes. So it was pretty much a mix of barnyard and a green bell pepper section in a garden. So I ended up guessing it was some sort of Pauillac from the awful 2007 vintage. But especially given Mr. Suckling's comments, I would certainly be interested in trying some of the more recent vintages of Ao Yun, as well as some other Chinese wines. The next takeaway relates to world-class Chilean producer Viña Vic. In a very short time, only about 12 or 15 years or so, Vigna Vic has gone from a relatively unknown producer to a highly acclaimed producer that's producing some of the best wines in the world, including the number 6 wine on James Suckling's Top 100 list, namely the 2021 Vigna Vic. This impressive wine received a 100-point score from Mr. Suckling, so certainly congratulations are in order to both Christian Vallejo, the talented winemaker, and to Vigna Vic for this impressive accomplishment. I've known the winemaker, Christian Vallejo, since probably 2020, and we did a podcast together in the early days of the pandemic, so I've had an opportunity to taste pretty much all the Vigna Vic wines from the early days until the present. I've certainly seen a steady progression, and while the wines were enjoyable early on, they've become truly special, world-class wines in the last couple vintages. This has also been a particularly good month for Vigna Vic, as they came in at the number 2 spot in the best vineyards in the entire world list that was just reported earlier this month. Fortunately, I'll be visiting Vigna Vic later this month to judge a wine competition, and while I'm there, I intend to do some wine tasting and certainly sit down with the winemaker and find out more about some of the grape growing and winemaking techniques that they're using and some of the impressive results that they are achieving. So I'll certainly be reporting back and sharing more of those insights with you in the next month or two. Mr. Suckling certainly did an excellent job with his list this year, in my opinion, and I've already mentioned a number of the wines that I recommend and think well of. But at this time in the video, it's time for me to reveal 2 of my absolute favorite wines for this list. One of them is a little bit more expensive and will be a wine you'll want to put away for a number of years, and the other one is an absolute steal at its price point. The first of these wines is the outstanding 2021 Dominus Estate from Napa Valley. The 2021 vintage is going to be truly special, and in fact, winemaker Todd Mostero believes that it's going to be one of the best vintages of Dominus Estate ever produced. This wine is a blend that consists of 95% Cabernet Sauvignon and 5% Cabernet Franc. This wine matured in 40% New French oak. Some of the specific techniques that Dominus Estate uses include organic and sustainable farming practices. Among other things, they're big fans of dry farming, which helps to ensure that the roots dig deep in search of water and nutrients. The result is lower yields with small grapes that have high skin-to-juice ratios and which produce intensely concentrated fruit. This is a wine that will definitely be better with at least another 8 or so years of bottle age on it, but you can definitely enjoy it for decades after that. Unlike most Napa Valley wineries, Dominus Estate does not sell wine directly, so you'll have to find your Dominus Estate wines in the secondary market. But be sure to shop around, as prices vary wildly, and they generally cost a little bit more than $300 for the top wine, but at some places sell it for closer to $400. So it definitely pays to shop around. The other one of my absolute favorite wines on Mr. Suckling's Top 100 list this year is a wine that came in at number 13 on his list. It received a 99-point score, and it sells for an extraordinarily reasonable $60 per bottle in the United States. This is a producer that I just visited about 6 weeks ago, and it's located in the Chianti Classico DOCG. This is a producer that's named Castella d'Ama, and the particular wine is the 2021 Castella d'Ama Chianti Classico Gran Selezione San Lorenzo. When I was there, I tried the 2016 vintage of this wine, and it was certainly one of my favorite wines of the entire trip. So this is definitely a wine that will benefit from some additional bottle age in your cellar, and I would probably start digging in around the year 2028 or 2029. This is an extraordinarily aromatic wine, and it has flavors and aromas of black cherry, blackberry, and violets. Castella d'Ama is located at 500 meters above sea level, and the extreme high elevation means very cool nights that help to preserve acidity, and there's extraordinarily rocky soils, which helps to make the vine struggle and which restricts yields and produces fruit with impressive intensity and concentration. As a result, this wine is always one of my favorites from Chianti Classico, and it's always one that I highly recommend. If you'd like to learn more about some of the wines that made the Top 100 list for James Suckling, I did a video back in the summer about some of my favorite wines from James Suckling's Great Wines of the World event, and there's at least a couple of those wines that I reviewed in that video that made the Top 100 list. So if you're interested, make sure you check out this video that's linked above.